It's a great privilege and delight to be with you tonight. Welcome to Weimar Institute. I see familiar faces, I see unfamiliar faces, and that is good because we're all coming together. Just by a show of hand, this is not the official roll call, we'll do that tomorrow. By a show of hand, how many of you represent, so to say, the academy? You have been a graduate of the academy or gone to the academy. Very nice. The college. Very nice. We're just getting ready because tomorrow this is going to happen more fully. A health program. I know some people asked me if this is also an alumni for New Start guests. So some people wanted to join us for this week and say, I went to New Start. How about that? Wanted to join us. And so we're delighted for that also. Of course, that is not as long and rigorous as the 4-year academic program, although quite rigorous if you're in the program. I want to welcome you this evening. My name is Erwin Nanashi. For those of you that may not know me, I serve here as Minister of Music, and we're so delighted that the Lord has blessed in the past and is still blessing with young musicians. How many of you are looking forward to hear some more music this weekend? It's just so typical. We hear it so often, right? What do you remember? Oh, the music around the piano in the old chapel or in the dorms, Friday evening, Sabbath evening, or Sabbath mornings, or as we would go out to the different churches. And people still ask us to join their services with music. And so thank you for the song service tonight. We can look forward to more music going forward. Just want to draw your attention to a few things, one of them being that we have special bulletins for you that are right next to the entrance door. Make sure that you grab one so that you have that and be able to navigate through this weekend. Also, we have special ambassadors that have name tags, and it says ambassadors on them. So if you are in need of finding different places on campus, please ask them. If you haven't been here for a while, some buildings may have different functions now. So you may want to ask those ambassadors and they will let you know what is happening today. The other thing is, some have asked about the United Choir tomorrow, about the Blessed Hope. We will be giving you the music tomorrow, although if you have sung it before, I'm sure you will still remember it. But we'll have some music there, and I'll ask you to come forward, and we'll try to fit on this stage as many as we can, and we'll have the music and we will sing it together. Later this evening, you will see that we have planned a candlelight. We started that last year, then it was a very nice time. What it basically means is that after we have our evening presentations, we will then go out and all of us will be given some light, candlelight, and so we will walk through different stations on the loop, and we'll stop and pray for the different buildings and what they represent, the departments and the students and the faculty. How many of you believe that this place needs some prayer? Amen? And so we really want to invite the Lord's Spirit over this weekend to be with us, so we will stop, and in between we will sing songs. And then we'll gather together at the very end and sing some final songs and start the Sabbath really with songs of praise. I'm delighted, and without any further ado, I'll ask Brother Roger to come forward and offer the prayer for us before we'll have a historical overview by Pastor Don Mackintosh.
Let's bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this Sabbath, that we can come together for this 40th annual alumni. Just ask you to be with the speaker, give him words of wisdom. Thank you so much for Weimar and what it stands for, and for all the students that have come through the gates and what it's done for them. We just ask you to be with us this weekend, help us reunite, and ultimately come closer to you. In your name, amen.
Well, good evening, and I want to add my welcome to those of you who are come back as alumni, both staff and students as well. And I think the first time I visited Weimar, Marilyn Wilcox was the dean. So I see her tonight, and good to see you back. And so I just want to go through a little history, which maybe some of you could improve on since you were actually living some of this history. Of course, Weimar's opened its doors as a joint sanatorium in November 17, 1919, and had 120 patients. The reason they called it the joint sanatorium was because it served a number of different counties. I think it was 27 that came here after World War I. And the patients lived in long, narrow wards or cottages lined with glass windows for maximum exposure to the fresh air and sunshine. And the canvas covers kept the rain and dew off the bedding. They didn't have windows, they had just screens. And stoneware hot water bottles heated each bed during the cold weather. And you still can find some of those down at the museum in Colfax. I think they called them pigs. Virtually a city unto itself, the sanitarium included a nursery, a grade school, a high school, was provided care for children of mothers with tuberculosis. And I just was out in the community just this week and visiting with some people up on the hill, and they said this was a housing community for all the staff that worked there at Weimar Institute. And here were the members of that joint effort. All the folks that had consumption or so-called tuberculosis came to Weimar at that time, and they all drove Teslas. At its peak in 1948, the sanitarium housed 550 patients in 14 buildings and was a major employer by far for the people of Weimar, pumping a monthly payroll of $125,000 into the local economy. Of course, there were many famous residents. How many of you are alumni tonight? Raise your hand if you're alumni. So you are very famous residents who were here at one time, but there were some others as well. Ben Nighthorse Campbell, who would end up being the governor of Colorado, and then of course the Karate Kid. And it's interesting to read some of their history of the time here at Weimar and how they went through the tunnels, and they had all kinds of escapades, and they wrote about it in their memoirs. Of course, Weimar's name was interesting. There was a colorful chief named Weimar, but his name did not really translate well to the German postmaster, who called him Weimar. So we got the name Weimar from that. Pat Morita, the Karate Kid, for 9 years from the time he was 2 until 11, he lived at Weimar. And he said, I cried for days. It should have been 4 days, or, I mean, it is 4 days perhaps. I cried for 4 days. I was so homesick for the doctors and nurses. So there was a good spirit that was here in serving those that had tuberculosis. And of course, Billy Graham and Ruth Graham were very familiar with Weimar, you may remember. Do you remember them visiting? Yeah, all nodding your heads as, what are you talking about? But in fact, they did. Because it turned into Camp Hope, Welcome to Hope Village. And this was the place where about 1,000 Vietnamese came off this ship, and they came right here to the port of Sacramento and came to Weimar. And it's been interesting to talk to some of the people that were here during that time. And you can see some of the paint still of how the building painted various pastel colors. That building. Go to the green building when they first arrived. And so they painted them all those different colors. And Ruth and Billy Graham, and I can't remember this gentleman's name, who organized everything, turned this into a refugee village. Now, I was told about this by several people, and one gentleman in particular told me about another piece of history. And Hope. And Tippi Hedren was a movie star of Hitchcock movies, which I'm sure none of you ever watched, so you don't know what I'm talking about. So she came, and she had such beautiful nails. And people looked at her nails, the Vietnamese wives of the premier of Vietnam and others who were here living on campus. And they were so interested in this that they said, look, we want to know how you do your nails. And so she brought the person that did her nails and taught them all how to do nails. And this led to an industry that is a very successful industry. Maybe if you didn't remember this, how many of you are ever alumni of the nail school? Okay, none of them are here tonight. Hedren flew in her personal manicurist to teach a group of 20 refugees the art of manicures. These 20 women, mainly the wives of high-ranking military officers, went on to transform the industry, which is now worth $8 billion and is dominated by Vietnamese Americans. How many of you have ever seen these in a mall somewhere? And I've often gone up and said, "Where did you get your training?" And they kind of like, "What?" And probably about 10 times I've talked to the leader of the spa, and they've said, "Well, actually, my mother or my friend or whatever was trained in California at Weimar." Now, how many of you knew that? This is the history of Weimar. Of course, after that, there were some others that came here in 1977, April 21. There was a group of people that met, and they responded from Northern and Central California teachers, people of business, students, physicians, housewives, attorneys, dentists, including a half a dozen pastors, came to see whether a cherished dream would indeed be born. And that was the idea of Weimar Institute. I was just talking to Ed Farguson, who serves in the administration here of Northern California. The other day, he came to campus, and he said, when I first came to campus, it was before it was ever purchased, and there were needles, pine needles, that were about 3 feet tall over everything. And he said it was kind of surreal. We swept those away, and we found underneath just everything you see now. He told me, this was about 10 years he told me this, but he said he went into one room and he found a projector that had been taken apart, a reel-to-reel projector, all the pieces. He went into the hospital rooms over in this building that now is administration building, and there were the patient gowns still hanging there and the beds still there, and they had just as if it had been abandoned, because for a while this also served as a community hospital, and during the Reagan years that came to an end. Business leaders provided support. The initial gift of $10,000 came from O.D. McKee in Collegedale, Tennessee, which made the deposit on the project possible and secured for us the option of purchase way back then. And of course, even now today, the McKee family is involved with the business school again and has donated, and that legacy of the McKees goes on. The bulletins are very interesting to read. I've read all the bulletins and all the minutes from the beginning of Weimar through now. I won't go through all of it with you, but it's very fascinating. But the unanimous decision to move ahead, the property was considered an extraordinary find, and they moved ahead with these initial plans, which included a retreat ministry, a health conditioning center or sanitarium, a small college, and a city ministry and a retirement center. And here was the early schematic, how things would work together. A training school, a health conditioning center, a city ministry, and an Adventist layman's retreat ministry. So this was the original vision, and many of those things are still happening now and have been realized perhaps in a lesser or greater fashion than at the beginning. More than 1,000 people toured the grounds during open house celebration. You can see all those people there right here on this hillside. And I liked how the newspaper put it, deceptively rustic on the exterior. Deceptively rustic. Look at that person next to you and just say, deceptively rustic. On the exterior, this building houses a fully equipped and licensed acute care hospital, complete with 2 modern surgery theaters, which is now an apartment. And it was named Amador by the previous owners. This building will become classrooms for the college, this particular building. And then, of course, where some people are staying for the weekend, in the end, it was formerly the nurses' dormitory, and the building was to be converted into apartments for active retired persons. Of course, now it's another sanitarium center. The Depression Recovery Program runs out of that facility 5 or 6 times a year. Doug Garcia was supposed to be with us this weekend and show us footage, but his mother got very sick. But you know, he did send me a few clips. I won't show all of them now, but this was some early outreach that was going on at the time. And they had a van that they would take down to Sacramento. And they would take blood pressures, as you can see, walking in and out. Of course, at that time, they had property down in Sacramento as well. And they would go on what we might call today total community involvement outreach was very alive and well. And then the Health Conditioning Center started in May 1978. No, that is not a bat. That is the first logo of the New Start Center. And when I found that, I was like, this is kind of like those different pictures of people that have the signs of the three angels outside of their churches that look like maybe bugs until you know what they are. But actually the acronym New Start was developed not by the Institute, by a patient. A guest in the very first health program came up with the New Start acronym. It took them a number of years until the early 80s to actually adopt the name. Elder Robert Pearson came and visited, and he was the first General Conference president that came. I'm not sure if Neil Wilson ever came or not. I've gotten mixed reviews on that. But okay, he came. So he came. Maybe Carl brought him, I'm not sure, but he came. And then before he even was a General Conference president, Ted Wilson came to visit. I remember calling him to come for an education summit. He said, well, I have evangelistic meetings in Egypt, I can't come. But then he called me back in 45 minutes and said, you know what, Weimar is more important in what it's supposed to be doing than what's happening right now, and something has occurred that has allowed me to change my schedule. And he flew out to be with us, and I still remember him sitting right up here on this grassy knoll, to use a phrase, and reading out of the book Medical Missionary Evangelism. And ever since that time, Elder Wilson has been very close to Weimar Institute and has come now several times. Here he is when we were vision casting for the restarting of Weimar. As you know, it closed down. The college came to a halt. There was not a college for about a year, and then it started up again. And he came for that kickoff, what was called New Start Global. And during that time, as that was vision cast again and we began working in the various communities, we recognized that something new had to happen that had not happened for a number of years at Weimar, and that was there needed to be a church on the campus so we could fully integrate the training and not leave it to a haphazard, ad hoc potential in area churches, although they were still reached out to. We did a lot of town hall meetings. There was a lot of discussion, and then the church here started about 2 years ago, as well as a clinic on campus. Question is, where would that church go? We finally now have initially didn't know where that would go. It was in a tent. It was in the old chapel, which was running out of space. And so now here it is here in Haskell Hall, but there are new plans in the future for it to be right up where that old chapel is again, and maybe Dr. Nedley will speak about that again, as this building is far too small already. Just other brief things. In the outreach that John Goley and Richard Fredericks and others from early years headed up at the Institute is still alive and well, again, with urban outreach to various cities around the country and working with pastors and clinicians in large clinics in numerous cities. I remember listening to Richard Nelson, who's here with us tonight, about all the expos in Iran and all these amazing pictures he showed me years ago. And you'd be happy to know that we tried to carry that legacy on in some way as well. And of course, where are we today? We have the various degrees that are offered here. Accreditation is something that we have entered into over the last 7 years, those talks, and they have been vigorous talks to go forward without compromising our stance on the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. And when I'm delighted that things are going forward positively, even though we are being true to our core values, and I think that's a blessing and also a great witness as well. Elder Wilson came and joined us again for another event just not so long ago and encouraged us to continue the outreach into the community and total community involvement, where our students and staff are going to various places, and everybody from our president and COO on down, or you might say across, because we're all brothers and sisters in Christ, are out witnessing each week in the community for a half day each week. And some people look pretty happy about it, and other people got married. So those of you that are here now know what that means. And it's great to hear the testimonies of the students and also to hear and see the interest of other folks from around the world. These are, I think, 8 different university presidents from Inter-America, was that, Randy, in that area? They all came and listened to reports of what's happening at Weimar, and they were most impressed with the outreach that happened. And then, after all that, you're not going to believe what happened next. How do you remember? We sang together tonight. So I know there's some gaps, but yeah, someone put that up on their Facebook page, and I just put that up right now. So that's a little history. So, okay, we have some interviews with some folks tonight. Linda Morgan's standing right here at front. Come forward. I want to just ask you a few questions. You're evidently one of the pioneers. I don't see you in this picture, but you were one of the pioneers here. Tell us what year you were here and what were some of your favorite remembrances. I think you're actually a student even now, nursing student, but please.
I was actually, after they had purchased it and decided to go forward with this, I was probably the first one to set foot on campus. And what had happened is I had been told to contact Dick Wynn. I was at PUC at the time, and to qualify to come here. And he said, well, as soon as school's out, show up. And so that was all it took. No application process or background check or anything, which they should have done.
Is there something we need to know?
No. And so, my family lived in Loomis, so I came home after school and I came right up here. And I came up here with a friend, and I drove on campus, and we parked, and we started going through buildings. Every building was unlocked. And like Don had said, there was beds and sheets and everything everywhere, and equipment, and it was spooky. We went into the lab. Yeah, just no people. We went into the lab, and here was like an experiment that had been started, and they just walked away from it. Went into the kitchen, and here's this pot on the stove with dried up food in it, and they just walked away from it. I began to wonder if we Adventists were right about the rapture. And after going all over and finding no one, I left, and then I came back a week later, and there was a few people, and so they said, go to the kitchen, and that's what I did. I became the first cook here. And so the first summer, there was actually a lot of people here. There was a lot of volunteers and students, and so it was busy, and we were cleaning up. And like he said, they were knee-deep in pine needles. This place had been neglected. You saw how much we had to rake this fall. Think of that over 3 years of accumulating, or 4, or however long it had been since. It was crazy. And then school started, and most everybody left. And it left this tiny little group of people here. And, so little, we could all fit in the Goran's living room, which used to be Dick Wynn's house, and have worship, because that was the whole group. It was just such a small group through that fall and the early winter. And I remember one time I got done with my duties in the kitchen early, and I decided to go out and try and see what people were doing out there. And I walked all over, and I couldn't find anybody. I thought, I'm going back to the kitchen. They'll come find me. When food's ready, they want it, So, that's kind of the beginning. It was very fun when the medical staff started showing up, and then more people started coming in, and pretty soon the college staff started showing up, and they started cleaning up. And actually and of course we called it Conditioning Center back then. It wasn't New Start. The first New Start was the building that's just this side of Haskell Hall that the Hills lived in just before they left. I don't know if anybody's living there now, but that was the first conditioning center. And we had a wonderful group of medical staff, and I actually transitioned from cooking for everybody to cooking for the patients before. I was here for 2 years, so from June of 77 to, I don't know, it was June or so of 79.
Amen? Now we know who we can rely on if we run out of a cook. Amen?
I want to say one thing about being the cook. So they said, and honestly, when I came here, I didn't know it was going to be a religious organization. I don't know that I would have come had I known that at the time. And they said, and you can't use this and this and this and this to cook with. And by the way, we don't have any cookbooks because nobody had made any at that point in time. And I wasn't even a vegetarian at that point. So God really was miraculous in teaching and helping me get through that, and also in his showing me him. And this is where I really met God and was converted.
Amen. Amen. Okay, Marilyn, Dr. Wilcox, would you come forward? Well, I know you have a lot of stories to tell.
By the way, I was never called Dr. Wilcox when I was here. Okay? I was Mrs. Wilcox.
Mrs. Wilcox. You were here from what years, and what are your fond remembrances of this place?
You know, I think there's 3 names I'd like to think about in your history. None of them are around anymore, but I think we need to mention them. I don't think most of us realized, but the real reason for Weimar starting was Morris Venden. Why didn't he come here? He was too afraid that righteousness by faith would be covered up with vegetarianism or whatever.
He didn't want righteousness by faith to be deep fried.
He was afraid we'd be legalistic. The man who stepped forward, now, when you say 40 years, do you mean the college started 40 years ago or the institute?
Let's just put circa 40 years. I'm not sure.
Okay. The college was begun by a group of educators and ministers who got together here, had a meeting, and the man who was the chairman of that committee was Dr. Garrity, Thomas Garrity, who was a prince in Adventism. I don't know whether you realize that or not. His son is an archaeologist at La Sierra. Anyway, he was the the chairman of the board. Really was very important for starting Weimar College. The other person that you may not have thought about is who found this property for us? Have any idea?
I don't. That's why we're interviewing you.
Okay. Ray Moore. What does that name sound to you? Homeschooling. Okay, and he's known even better among evangelicals than among Adventists. He was the one that found this property and connected with another group of people who you talked about tonight, basically headed up by Dick Wynn. So those two got together that famous time when they were down in Sacramento, and they had 100 people there, and they were trying to decide whether to buy this or not, and the vote was unanimous. Okay. Let's see, one other person. Another person who was very important with the college was Colin Standish. And he just died. And Carl wrote Carl, would you like to tell people what you said about Dr. Standish? He just died this weekend.
Yes, Dr. Standish was the first dean of the college. And I remember him because when I came here, there was a very strict dress code. And I had never not worn Levi's. And I was told I could not wear Levi's here. And I don't need that. And
For the tape.
oh, they can do without it. Okay, so I decided I was going to wear Levi's anyway. And of course, I got reported for disobeying the rules. And Dr. Standish had a meeting with me. And he never mentioned the dress code once. He asked how I was doing. He told me he was happy I was here. It was a lovely conversation about learning and scholarship. And then we parted ways. And I put my Levi's away for the rest of the semester. So that gives you some idea of what kind of dean he was. And in those early days, I was here in the second year the college was open. Dr. Standish also taught a course in psychology that I still remember, because he went through all the psychological paradigms and theories, and he explained why their worldview was not biblical. And I have used that content in my teaching ever since. And he just died within the last week or two, I believe.
Yes, what I remember him was, before he came here, he was the president at CUC. And he used to say that when he had to reprimand a student, that before he would even talk to that student, he would kneel down and ask God to love that student. I always remember that.
Well, thank you.
So you're going to ask me what was blessed. How did he get blessed here? Students were the most important things in my experience here. The students were wonderful. I loved it. You know, there's no place can you teach anywhere in colleges where you have such wonderful students as you do here.
Thank you so much. Amen? Okay, Norm Carey. Norm, what years were you here, and what's your favorite remembrances?
Let's see, I was a Pioneer student, so I was here, fall, winter of 1978, and then I went back to Loma Linda, where I was running about 1,200 hives of bees, and I put them up for sale and asked the Lord to sell them if he wanted me to continue. So after 6 months of working, I came back, put them up for sale again, and was here for the fall, winter of 1979. And I have a lot of memories. The first year, I remember driving in, all the colors, the different colors you'd mentioned. That was kind of unique. The men were staying over in, I believe, that same area, and we had cold showers for 4 days. They didn't have hot water till about the 5th day, so that was something I won't forget. That's right. And then the chapel here, I remember some special times after Friday evening service or other times. We were small. I think it was around 55 students or so that first quarter. I might be off a few students, but I think it was 55. And what was amazing was about a third of the students were older students like myself. I was 21. So when I graduated from high school, I continued in the business that I started when I was younger. And then when I heard about Weimar, I was pretty excited. So I came up before it started and checked it out and put in an application, was accepted, and I felt like God wanted me to be here. And it was an amazing experience. So after the chapel, sometimes we would go outside and we'd form a circle, and we spent a lot of time sharing and praying together. That was really special. A couple other quick things. I worked at the Weimar one quarter. I worked at the reconditioning center 1 quarter, and then 2 quarters in the kitchen. One time Shirley was asking me, this was, I think she came right after you started or something, Shirley, and she asked me, I stayed one Thanksgiving, she asked me to make 12 pie crusts for pumpkin pie. So she gave me the recipe, and I had to start doubling and tripling because I was going to make all these pie crusts. And I ended up making enough dough for about 40, you know. And so after I made the 12, I go, Shirley, I'm so sorry. She goes, it's okay, Norm. We'll make some kind of little tarts or something. And then another amazing experience was when I worked in the reconditioning center. It was real simple at that time. I mean, I remember it being in 2 or 3 different buildings, and we had this one gentleman that was trying to quit smoking, and so I remember putting a container of hot water, and he sat in the chair, and they'd wrap a sheet around him, you know, and just real simple things like that were really effective. And I remember working with this one lady that was a doctor's wife, a physician's wife, and she had really split headaches and was not feeling well. She was on like 10 or 11 prescriptions, and that was the days when the patients or guests would stay for 21 days. And so she went through the whole program, and little by little, by the end of the program, she was walking several miles a day. She was off all her prescriptions. Her headaches were gone. And it was just, you could just see miracle after miracle with those guests. And it was really, really rewarding. The spirit at Weimar was beautiful. The singing, you could just really feel the presence of the Holy Spirit. And yeah, it was a very, very special time.
Thank you so much, Norman. And Jennifer Ish, says here in 1982. Share a couple of your warmest remembrances with us.
Well, I was with Norm. I was here the first 4 years, from 78 to 82, and I agree with Norm on a lot of those great memories. I remember when I first heard about Weimar and that they were going to teach to be medical missionaries, I said, oh, that is what I've always wanted to be since I read Ministry of Healing in Academy. And I couldn't find any school that taught it, and I said, you know, here's a school that's going to teach that, and I want to be there. So I put my application in, and I kept on saying to everyone, oh, I'm so afraid that I'm not going to get accepted. Because I kept on hearing rumors that there were so many people were applying. And so when I got accepted, I really felt it was God's will for me to be here. And so when I came, my parents brought me here, and they weren't quite ready for college to start, although they had to start. You know, they were just getting everything sort of figured out, and they said, okay, your beds are in a stack over there in this building. Go pick them up and assemble them. And we went, and there was just like these old metal springs, you know, just all stacked high to the ceiling. And I thought, man, these haven't been used since the tuberculosis sanitarium. And my dad was a retired fireman, and he really knew how to clean, so he got all the cleaning materials, and we scrubbed them down, and we got it all fixed up. But my mother did cry all the way to Sacramento after she left. But my room was right here in this corner here. This was the ladies' dorm. And they picked this room, this building, because it had a tall barbed wire fence around it, and they thought we'd be safe. Not really, but it was just, and we called it Echo Hall because it had wings on it that they just put partitions up. They were those, you know, that really particle board. It didn't go all the way to the ceiling, so if you were trying to study and your next door neighbor was having a nice conversation. Anyway, it echoed all the way through. But our room, we had, it was a larger room, private, but we had 4 roommates in there, and we knew each other from Upper Columbia Academy. We had all gone to that school. So it was like, okay, we talked all the time. We didn't get any studying done. But the fellowship was wonderful. It was like a family. We knew each other. We had such rich experience because we were pioneering. We didn't know if we should go to school in the morning and work in the afternoon or vice versa, and when will we do outreach. And we got all that figured out. Okay, outreach was Wednesday, and we would split. The kids some would go in the morning, and the classes were here and there, and there was a lot of experimental, and I remember the first quarter we just had tons of chapel experiences. We were just getting, every morning someone was talking to us for hours, and it was like chapel, and and then it was a bit overwhelming, and I remember having a meeting with one of the administrators at the second quarter, and I said, wouldn't it be nice if we had home fellowship worships in the morning where we could have smaller groups and maybe some of us could talk? And so that started, and that was really special when we went to staff and faculty homes in small groups, and then some of them would even invite us for breakfast. So that was really special. We had...
What time was that? 4:30 in the morning?
Oh, no. No, it was, I think, around 7. I'm not sure.
That's late.
And time to get to class and work by 8 or 9. So, yes, we had wonderful experiences. And like Norm says, the New Start, which was then Health Education Center, it changed its name a couple times before it became New Start, was in multiple places. And I remember when I worked in there 1 year, 1 quarter, we had to take our patient that we were assigned to different stations to give them different treatments. And they had like 15 minutes of sun. And sun therapy was extremely important at the beginning of the New Start programs here, because the original medical director, Zane Keim, even wrote a book about importance of vitamin D. And so they had areas where we would sunbathe around campus. And they were supposed to be private, but sometimes the wind would knock down the areas. It wasn't so private. And but they encouraged all of us, so we were all out there getting sun at various times. But then they had, for the winter months, a place in the store that's now the store. It was a sort of a closet there where they had the sun tanning, the lights. And we had to take our patient there for so many minutes. And then they had the hydrotherapy thermophore treatments in the mail room in the administration building. And then they had the hydrotherapy whirlpool, and I think it was in the exercise building now. So you were taking your patient multiple places around campus, which they got exercise doing that. But then I think one of my fondest memories is the chapel and singing and the choir with Prof. Constantine, and of course the friendships lifelong friendships that you make with people. And I know I have friends that are hopefully watching live stream from Germany and maybe Denmark and different places. We have friends that wanted to be here that are missionaries in Africa and different places that are still part of the Weimar family. Once you've been here, and I told people, I said, if you've been here one quarter, you are an alumni of Weimar, because you have that Weimar experience that you've gone through. So you can always come back, no matter if you didn't graduate, you're always part of this family. So anyway, I'm glad that I was here those first 4 years and came back as a staff, and have very happy memories of meeting my husband and having my child here, and just being a part of this extended family.
I get the sense that if we talk to these people we just had up here, we could learn a lot more. How many of you want to talk to them afterwards and hear even more stories of what happened here, what God did, and what God is still doing in their lives? Well, it's time now for our message. Do I see Dr. Nedley here? There he is. And so thank you all for sharing and bringing history alive. And now a message from our president.
It's on this side. Before the message from the president, I'd like to invite Richard and Anna Nelson up if they're here. Okay, good. It's been some time since our paths have crossed. Why don't you come on up? Is there I think there's a microphone over here. How many students were able to hear from these two today? Can you raise your hands? Okay, there's a few students. But Richard Nelson is also, by definition of Jennifer, he is an alumnus, because he actually didn't graduate from here, but if we're going to expand the definition, he did come here. Anna is a full-fledged alumnus and a graduate from Weimar College. But tell us a little bit about your experience as well, being here, and also what's going on now in your lives.
So the year was 1978, and a friend of mine who is a medical student at Loma Linda University was sending $15 a month here. He said, Richard, you've got to go here. And I was studying down at Loma Linda. And I actually applied, came up in 1980. It was the most thorough interview. And Dr. Standish continued to ask all these questions. I was really impressed. Learned a lot about the interview technique from him. But even though I didn't come at that time, I was gathering as much information as I could about New Start, and at that time, the 8 principles of health as applied here. And in 1982, I joined my parents in Manila, where the Health Expo was born, with Neil Wilson. We had 17,500 people coming, 1,100 baptisms. But that's how Health Expo got started. But it was interesting because my parents, Wilbur and Dorothy, who came here in the 80s, had not heard of Weimar. I'm the one who told them about it because I had come up for the interview and shared all about this from Dr. Milton Teskey, who was a medical student at that time. Anyway, push forward to 1983.
Well, just a little, pause a little bit. So it was Milton Teskey who was giving
$15 a month. Yes.
Do you think, does anyone think Weimar can still benefit from $15 a month from medical students? Absolutely. It's those type of people that keep institutions like this going. So thank God for the Milton Teskeys that are out there. Go ahead.
If any of you haven't heard Milton Teskey, he gives one of the best lectures on reversing diabetes. He used to be with us in the reversing diabetes seminars all around the world. Well, in 1983, I had the opportunity to go out to the Middle East, and I joined the Loma Linda Heart team. And I remember my first time to invite all the top doctors over to my little apartment, and I was going to introduce them to the vegan cooking of Weimar. And I had gotten some recipes, and one of them was for this wonderful loaf. And I had never cooked a loaf before. And so I followed all the ingredients, and one of the Heart team members, she's very prominent, Joan Coggin. I don't know if you've seen her, but she's prominent. And as we were eating, she stopped her eating for a moment, and she said, "Richard, there's splinters in the roast." And Dr. Wareham, who was the top surgeon, he was also picking at his teeth. And he said, "Where did you get this recipe?" I said, "From Weimar Institute." And Dr. Coggin said, "Would you detail exactly what is in that loaf from Weimar?" So I read off all the things, including sunflower seeds, and she said, "Did you shell the sunflower seeds?" And I said, "It didn't say in the book to shell the sunflower seeds." Anyway, I will tell you, that Sabbath on, every lunch we had, the Heart team made it a New Start luncheon. And there is no better ambassador overseas for the New Start program than Dr. Ellsworth Wareham. I just saw him before coming up. He's 104 years old. He said getting old is a little bit boring, but he attributes, of course, his longevity in part to his lifestyle. Push forward a little more time, I had the great opportunity of working with Weimar Academy and Weimar College students that my father kept dragging along with my mom all over the world. And I remember it took them out to China, and I remember him calling and saying, "I'm missing a student. We had to leave him in Hong Kong because he had a South African passport." Anyway, that was John Foster. Fortunately, he came back and went on to medical school. But we had wonderful opportunities with students and from college and academy. I will tell you, my experience at Weimar, from helping out in the early days to later becoming vice president here, was the people. And what I can remember working with the people, I felt whenever I was on campus, I was part of the family of God. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, as you travel in other parts of the world, you would be very surprised the influence that Weimar has had around the world, all the way up to some of the top executives in different countries. You just don't hear about it very much. And if it wasn't for Weimar College students and Weimar Academy students, I don't think I would have ever met my wife, but I need to introduce Anna. Anna comes from a unique part of the north part of the former Soviet Union. How did you learn about Weimar?
This is 1991, and I was just finishing high school when a Quiet Hour team, along with some of the Weimar faculty and students, came over to Arkhangelsk, which was my hometown, to conduct a health expo. Well, at the time, you will recognize, since we're still talking about the Soviet Union, we haven't quite crossed the bridge into being very open about Christianity and all of those things. So that was very, very new. This is where I learned for the first time about God and about all these things that were so new to us. This was my initial introduction to Christianity, period. And at that point, I was invited to continue working with this team traveling around the former USSR, where we continued doing health programs, which was great, a lot of fun, grand adventure, and along the way, I couldn't help but be learning a little bit more and more about this God they are talking about, what's behind their joy, what's behind their love, what's behind their... Why on earth are they coming to this God-forsaken country and talking to us about all these great things? That was my introduction to God, and I am delighted to say that after that, every single time we went to another program, I was determined I was not going to join them quite yet until I knew fully what the whole message was about. And throughout that journey, I didn't really discover any particular message. I discovered the love. And this is what's so important. It is God's love that was being shared with me. Well, moving on, as I continued doing these programs, they kept saying, you really should come to Weimar College. Well, we know it's not possible for some Russian student who has no money to be coming to the States and to be studying here, and that wasn't even part of the dream. But one thing led to another, and here I was at Weimar, and I had my first opportunity to start attending classes, which was exciting and fun and new, and I met so many wonderful friends and so many wonderful instructors. And then after spending a quarter or two, I'd be going back to conduct more health expos, and this continued for several years. And finally, the registrar came to me and said, Anna, you've got to sit down and finish your degree and then go back gallivanting the world. But it was really hard, and I was just telling the students today, the practical experience that you're getting at the same time is part of that education as well. So I probably shouldn't be saying that too much with the students here, but really I enjoyed both parts, and it did take me about 7 years to finish my degree, but hey, I did finish it finally. But I was really blessed to have wonderful faculty and outstanding deans at the time. Dr. Wilcox was the dean when I was here. Homer Trecarton was another one, and we had so many wonderful experiences, good and bad. I remember my first introduction to poison oak happened right here on these trails. But then the good part happened when I was lost in the middle of the night. I don't know what I was doing walking the trails after the darkness fell, but I found myself somewhere out in Colfax seeing some lights of some house, and I said, there's people there. So I went there and I called the Dean of Women. It was Beverly Christensen at that time, and lo and behold, she was there in 5-10 minutes to pick me up and make sure. Then, of course, I was telling somebody earlier, I spent several nights in hot showers trying to get over the poison oak, but anyhow, that's a whole different story. And then taking the students to different churches around the area and conducting programs and meeting wonderful people in the community. All of those experiences don't go away. I remember midnight prayer meetings at 2 a.m. Do you still do that? We had 2 a.m. Gatherings by the water tower. I remember that, and many of the students will remember those. It was voluntary, it was not required, but it was it was allowed, coming to think of it. But we had wonderful experiences, and I still keep track of some of my friends from those days. This is special. This was a very special time, and this was a very special opportunity to come here. There's one thing I want to mention. One of the things when I was a student, there were a lot of students saying, we really want to go on, and we really want to maybe get a nursing degree or get some graduate degrees. But at the time, it didn't seem possible. It only seemed like a dream, and I'm very excited. I hear there's some developments here. I'm guessing you'll be sharing some of that. But I'm very excited to see that right now Weimar College is going to be able to provide the wonderful opportunities to the students to take what they already have and take it a step beyond and enrich their experience and skills to where they can really continue to make wonderful difference and become great leaders in the future for our church, for our community.
So you're not only here for Alumni Weekend, you told me. You're here for another reason as well.
Well, I was actually coming for the Alumni Weekend, but at the same time, my husband always had this thing, you never go just for fun. You always combine work and fun together. I could never understand that. But I'm currently working at the School of Public Health at Loma Linda University, and one of the things, the moment I arrived there 3 or 4 years ago, I've always said, the students we really need here are the Weimar students. Well, what's Weimar College? Oh, I said, said, you have no idea. Those students, those people are so committed. They're so devoted to service. This is the very kind of people we want to have. Loma Linda University was built and established by all those pioneers with Ellen White at the head to further the ministry of Jesus Christ. And that's what we're there for. This is the kind of students we need. And they said, well, where's that Weimar and how do we get them? And well, they wouldn't let us take the students, and they were not accredited. And I had to go talk to our dean, and I had to go talk to all sorts of people. And I said, can't we make any exceptions? And they just said, Anna, wait. I think we're getting somewhere. Just give me another few months. So I was shall I mention?
Sure.
So I was very excited and delighted last May when I contacted that person once again, and I said, is there any movement? Is there any progress? Can we start inviting Weimar students back to, not back, but to our public health school here? And she said, you have no idea. Just 2 days ago we had a meeting, and it's been made official that at this point we will accept any Weimar College graduate who has completed the program within the current period of the accreditation status. So with that I said yes, and I said I'm going to Weimar, and right there and then I saw Alumni Weekend coming up, and I said, what could be a better time?
All right, great. And you're recruiting for another school there, aren't you?
School of Allied Health. And of course, that's the school that has been so entrenched with the HEART team. And when I was here previously in administration, I invited Dr. Roy Jutsi. Some of you might remember him. I know Dr. Lukens will remember him. But I thought it was important that we have one of our top cardiologists from an allopathic physician to come and be on the board. It was I was very nervous, however, when he came and said, you know, Richard, we need to make sure all of the patients are on statins. That's the cholesterol-lowering medication. And then my heart just sunk, because here was a dear friend, a missionary doctor who we had known in our family our whole life, and he's telling us how to do things. So I thought to myself, what can I say? So I prayed about it almost all night. And the next morning on the news, CNN, Bayer was featured. Bayer was the maker of Baycol, the top new statin. And Baycol was being recalled because of a nasty little side effect called sudden death. And when I went to see Dr. Jutsi for breakfast, he said, Richard, I'm on board with you. The physicians can make their decision who's going to go on that. So, you know, stay the course. As Paul said in 1 Corinthians 16:9, there's a great opportunity in front of us, but there's also great adversaries or obstacles. Never stop to think of the power of God to overcome all of this, because Weimar has a special place in this world in this last time.
Amen. Thank you both very much. Well, why are we here tonight, and why are we here at Weimar? I think this next statement sums it up. With such an army of workers as our who? Youth. And what two words are used next? Rightly trained, might furnish how soon the message of a crucified, risen, and soon coming Savior might be carried where? To the whole world. How soon might the end come? The end of suffering and sorrow and sin. And so this is why Weimar was established 40 years ago, and this is why it is growing today, because this is our need. There's no better way that you can hasten the coming of the Lord than to be involved in either being trained as a youth or being part of training youth. How soon, in place of a possession here, with its blight of sin and pain, our children might receive their inheritance, where the righteous shall inherit the land and dwell therein forever, where the inhabitant shall not say, I am what? Sick. And remember, Weimar's vision is to heal a hurting world. There's no better way to heal the hurting world, where sickness is not only gone when you leave New Start or Depression Recovery, but going to be gone for eternity. And the voice of weeping shall be no more herd. Education stands at the center of the great controversy. Sometimes we don't see it that way, but it truly is. This is the struggle for the minds and hearts of the next generation. And biblical Christianity today is a revolution. And that's why Weimar Institute is revolutionary. It stands really at the center of this revolution. This directive to teach, heal, and preach. Christian education is also where we get our next leaders from. And Weimar Institute particularly is involved, and it was involved in the beginning, as we just heard, but also involved in a very major way, even by board policy imperative, that we train leaders, our next generation of leaders here at Weimar. It not only will help evangelize the young people, but it will prepare them to evangelize others and solidify them with the grand perspective of the biblical great controversy view and be able to help them to have everything in life in its proper perspective. Well, as you've seen from the little brochure today, Weimar Institute has now turned 40 years old. I remember when I turned 40 years old, they had the black balloons and all of the over-the-hill type jokes. Actually, it occurred on although my staff did that earlier, my actual 40th birthday was on a Sunday, and I thought there wouldn't be much celebration at all. But of course, I guess I forgot I was married to Erica, and she arranged things where I thought I was going to go do some work at some place where I was really wanting to do work, and I come into this dark place to do a lot of work and turn on the lights, and there's about 100 people in there saying happy birthday. But 40 years is an important time period. You've gone through your training, you've gone through that solid aspect of things, and this is really where your life of service often begins. And Weimar Institute did start with tremendous shared sacrifices we've heard about today, just touching the surface of the shared sacrifice that it started with. And it struggled. It had significant struggles. After a few years, there was less struggling. The Douglas years started in the early 80s, I think ended in 1991. I think he was the longest sitting president at that time of Weimar Institute, now the second longest. But that 8-year span, Weimar grew significantly, enrollment grew, the dorms were near capacity or at capacity. And it was at the end of that era that I was first called to be an associate of Weimar Institute. Herb Douglas was going to retire, and he wanted to have the New Start Lifestyle Center solidified, and he actually flew to my house in Oklahoma, sat there across the living room with my wife, Erica, and the new president, who hadn't been president yet, but he was the president-elect. And I'm blanking on his name. Somebody help me with it. He wasn't here that long, but he was an actuary, and I think he was a member of the board. No, it was before Montag.
Paul Robertson.
That's it, Paul Robertson. So, in fact, Robertson built the house where I think the Bensons are living today. So he built that house, was kind of a wealthy actuary. He was there as well with Douglas to try to recruit me here. And so I thought, well, if they're going to come out to visit me, I'll go out to visit Weimar Institute. And so I had been here one time before in my life. It was actually when I was on my way to go to medical school at Loma Linda. I was a Michigan boy and wanting to do mission evangelism, medical work. I thought Loma Linda was the best place to go. And my father, who had followed Weimar's start, it was kind of a nationally known thing in Adventism with Weimar starting up. You guys did a great job, whoever was doing that job as far as marketing and getting the word out when Weimar first started. And so my father would tell me about what was going on at Weimar Institute and things, and we first went, he was taking 2 weeks off of his general work as an engineer for General Motors, so we drove across the country first to visit my brother in Seattle, who had some connections where I could get my first car. In Loma Linda, there's no dorms to stay in per se, and you have to have clinical rotation, so you kind of have to have a car. And so it was my first own car, and so he had connections to get me a little car. And so we drove down here together in this little car with my parents' larger vehicle together, and I wasn't too excited about being here at Weimar Institute the first time. I was excited to start medical school, but my dad wanted to see this place. And so we came on the campus. It was July at that time. Medical school started at the end of July. And we came on campus and talked to a few people, and there wasn't much happening. That was in 1982 in July. I'm not sure why there wasn't much happening, but we were here about 30 or 45 minutes and turned around and left. And went to Loma Linda, and I didn't really think much about Weimar since until Douglas was across the room in my living room asking me to come here. By this time I had known about New Start, and I thought I would come. But, God has his timing. When I came out here, Dr. Lukens actually was here. I don't know if you remember back in 1991 when I showed up. But at that time, the medical director was Warren Peters. He was getting ready to leave, but he said some very disparaging things about Herb Douglas and about administration here, and said, it's kind of interesting, they never consulted with me about you coming out here. You'd think they'd talk to the medical staff, and went through those type of remarks, and I realized there's some conflict going on here, and I've got a lot of good things to do in Oklahoma. I don't think I want to get in the middle of this conflict. And so I respectfully said no, and went back to Oklahoma. And we continued to do God's work there. So after age 13, when Douglas left, until just over 30, at least this is my analysis, some might have some different analysis and might even be more accurate for those that have been here, but these are just hearing from a distance. Back after the 90s started to progress, there were two famous Weimar people that came out to the Lifestyle Center of America, where I was the first medical director. Instead of becoming associated with New Start, I became associated with the Lifestyle Center of America, which was a new lifestyle center that was kind of the flagship lifestyle center. $12 million is what it cost to build it, and they still had millions of dollars in reserve in which they could run the institution. And for those of you that have been there, it's certainly a beautiful lifestyle center. But two of the people that we asked to come out to help us were former Weimar students and staff, John Goley and Dennis Blum. And so they would fill me in on what was going on at Weimar. Every board meeting would come, and they would say, Weimar is going to close next month. It's just really sad. I mean, things are just really bad. And then the next month, I would hear the same thing, and 6 months later, I would hear the same thing, and it just looked like Weimar was on the verge of disaster every time I met up with those individuals. And I did find out there was a different president every year or two from that time until 2008. And it's hard to kind of get things going when you don't have a president that's going to be able to last a long time. Then I found out about the conflicted board later on. And when you have a conflicted board, that does trickle down to the rest of the institution. Jerry Page, who was on that board for many years, stated in this last board meeting that just occurred last week that it was the most difficult board he had ever been a part of. And he's been on a lot of boards, hospital boards and college boards and of course, as president of conferences. He's been on conference executive committees. He's now the general conference, ministerial director. Thank you. And he said just about every time decisions were made by one-vote majorities. And a lot of conflict was occurring. And of course, when you have that, you realize when the board is in charge of the president, why presidents were changing, every year or two, and those sorts of things. So from 95 to 2008, this is when I would hear about Weimar running out of money, problems with enrollment, and multiple problems. I did get associated with it later on as a result of Carl Wilcox's mother, who was dean at the time when Hans Diehl could not come and teach principles of health as an elective. And so I remember getting a call from her saying, can you come out and teach principles of health? Proof Positive had just come out, so it was a fresh textbook. And I came out and taught 45 students. I remember I actually have pictures of all of them. Some of them are physicians today. One of them is a leading physician in Australia that we taught, Ludemer. I don't know if you remember that name. It's actually interesting to review those 45 students that I taught, and then I was asked to come out and teach the next year, and I think I did it for 2 or 3 years while she was here as dean. In 2003, Weimar turned 25, and at that time, my practice was maximized out to full capacity. I had physician working for me, I had physician assistants working for me, and we still didn't have enough room. I can tell you this, if you go into lifestyle medicine and do it God's way, you are going to have all sorts of demands of the public to see you. And that's what was happening. I hired and trained a new physician who responded to an ad for a physician assistant. I actually put out an ad among our union papers for a physician assistant, and a physician called and said, I'd like to work as your physician assistant. I said, why don't you come as a physician? He says, I don't know how to be a physician really to practice like you do, because I've practiced in I'll just tell you, he practiced in Uchee Pines, and he at that time believed in 0 medications, 0 pharmaceuticals, and didn't even know how to be able to take someone off or on, or how to be able to utilize all of this. But he came across a book by Dr. Harding, which showed Ellen White's principles in regards to medications. And just briefly, Ellen White was not against medications current block the way sometimes she's interpreted to be. And so that book goes through all of that sort of side of things. And once he saw the light on this, he said, I'd like to be able to expand and work as a lifestyle physician like you do in acute care settings as well as other settings. And I know I can't do that first, so I'll come as a physician assistant. So I took some significant time to train him. I also trained another physician assistant at the time. I was also involved in training physician assistants and nurse practitioners. I was affiliated with a couple of local universities in doing both of that, and was a professor there as well. But I was really trying to recruit more lifestyle physicians because we needed to fit the demand that was there. It's very hard to turn down patients that are in need, who need you very badly, and you know that you can help them, and you know that they're not going to get the help they need elsewhere, and just say no. And so I needed more physicians, and I would call around the entire country looking for lifestyle physicians like myself, but I found everyone I called was exactly in the same predicament I was in. And I realized we had a shortage of laborers. And I realized we have to go back to the education model. And I thought the only way we can expand this long term is to actually train pre-medical students who will have more time to learn lifestyle medicine and nutrition. Once you have a physician that's trained in the allopathic way, it's very difficult to be able to train them at that point in regards to lifestyle medicine, because they have spent so many years training in allopathic, they've done their residency, now they have to pay off all their debts. In fact, I just talked to one yesterday who has a $500,000 debt, who I'm trying to attract to come here and learn more lifestyle-related medicine. And they can't leave where they're at. Their feet are kind of in concrete, and they can't really learn those principles unless they're taught. And I realized we have to go back to training individuals at an earlier stage. We also have to have it research-based, and also have to have it as a core central aspect of winning of souls. So I actually called together an educational summit in Ardmore, Oklahoma, back in 2003, 2004, and one of the people I called was Herb Douglas. And I called other educators. I called general conference heads of education departments, those who loved the book education, to see how we could put together a college where you could actually train nurses, physicians, and others, pre-med, these principles of lifestyle medicine. At the end of that summit, the group that was there voted to start a college. We actually hired an administrator who was an attorney as well as someone that liked lifestyle medicine to get the ball rolling. I didn't have any time to do it because I had patients to see. And we even called a follow-up summit to see how things were going, but this attorney ended up having struggles in his own life and other issues, and never really did get the ball rolling. And I became busy with life as well as a soul winning and lifestyle medicine, and the issue just kind of went away at that point. And I thought it was a good idea, but I don't think it's ever going to happen. 2008, 10 years ago, Weimar is now 30. I had just agreed to close the deal on a large medical practice building in a prominent location, probably the most prominent medical location in Ardmore, Oklahoma. Erica and I had met with the business owner, and we said, this is what we want. We're ready to do it. We agreed on the price, and it was going to really be able to expand primarily with mid-level practitioners. Because again, I couldn't get the physicians, but at least with mid-levels, I could train them to be able to do what I would want to do. What are mid-levels? Those are physician assistants, nurse practitioners. So verbally gave the agreement, and the very next day, the president of Amazing Facts called and said, we are considering rescuing Weimar. The college is already closed. I hadn't kept up by then because Dennis Blum and John Goley had long left Oklahoma, and so they weren't giving me monthly updates on Weimar. And I didn't realize the college had closed, but the college had closed. The academy will be next, we're told, but we won't enter to rescue Weimar unless you come and be the president of Weimar. This was not what I was looking to do. And so I realized getting a call like this, particularly with the desire to train healing professionals in soul-winning lifestyle medicine nutrition from years earlier, I began to analyze, I can continue to do what I'm doing, and yes, we were winning souls, probably in our practice and throughout our extended practice, probably 20 souls a year were being won in our practice. We were having remarkable progress in regards to healing physical disease, as well as mental disease. We had already started the Depression and Anxiety Recovery Program. We were running it through the Lifestyle Center of America. It turns out the only program they ran that was profitable there. And it's kind of interesting, Weimar Institute that was on the verge of closing month by month, the Lifestyle Center of America has long ago closed and sold with all of that money. So money is not the solution alone to keeping places like this alive. And so, how to make difficult decisions. I think you'll have to be a pre-med student and come to the pre-med club tomorrow night to find out how to do that, because I'm not going to go through all of this. But just briefly, I was at the Arizona camp meeting right after this, and so I had time to spend in prayer, because from a busy practice from morning till night, I now had time to fast and pray like I rarely had in an extended period of time, because I was only giving 2 talks a day. So for a doctor giving 2 talks a day at a camp meeting, that's like a piece of cake. And it was, I had all this extra time. And so I used my analytical brain to the best of my ability. And I asked what would be best for the highest likelihood of myself and my family to enter eternal life. We're told our families come first, and how can we win others in a massive way unless we ourselves are also one? What would be best for the local community to enter into eternal life? Not just the local community in Oklahoma, but if I move, the local community I'm going to be a part of. And also what would be best for the national and worldwide field to enter into eternal life. At this time, we were influencing the national and worldwide field with many of our speaking appointments and other things that we were doing in trying to build up the work. After I did that analytical approach, it actually came out with much prayer and fasting that we should not go to Weimar and we should stay in Oklahoma. And I called the president of Amazing Facts up and said, I've gone through it. It's not that big a difference, but with the weighted pro-con list, it actually favors Oklahoma and not Weimar. I'm very sorry, but I'm going to have to turn this down. And he said, tell me what was on that list and all of the things. So he wanted to get into details of it. And so, after analyzing it, it came into three major areas that were what shifted it from Oklahoma. And these were areas that were largely unknown. So I had to put them as threes, rating it from 1 to 5 and threes. He says, well, let's assume all of those three major areas are 5s. Then how would it come out? I said, well, then it would have come out for Weimar. He says, I think you need to assume the Lord's going to make all those 5s if you come out here. And you just need to come to Weimar. So, wow, what was I to do after that? Because, yes, it was unknown, and I didn't know. But the end of it, after more prayer and fasting, is I realized the exponential growth that could happen if we trained a lot more physicians and healthcare providers to do what I was doing. So then I said yes. And then the real sacrifice began. We had to hire college faculty before there was one student. That's significant when you're already in debt. Buildings were in tremendous disrepair. There was no money to actually keep things up. Weimar did not keep a budget that actually had depreciation as part of it. So their budget wasn't even making it with depreciation, which means they couldn't keep anything up. This place, Echo Hall, was condemned already. You weren't even supposed to enter in. It could collapse on you at any time. The Weimar Inn was not any place you'd have to want to run depression recovery or anything. It was just in significant problems. The only building that was somewhat in good shape was the lodge, because you at least had to get people from New Start to come there. But often the comments were, this is world famous New Start at Weimar, and it was still pretty much 80s decorum in 2008 that was going on there. The inn couldn't hold any outside program. As mentioned, Echo Hall was already condemned. The roads were full of huge potholes, and it was a task just to drive to the academy safely. And at night, if you didn't have lights on, your car was not going to make it. And if you didn't have your seatbelt on, you probably weren't either. And morale was obviously extremely low. Now that, it looked like things were going to change, the few staff that were here were hopeful, but it was still quite low. But we came and did our level best to restart the college. And it took a tremendous amount of money. I'll tell you, it took well over $2 million. And a lot of it came from myself and what we were going to put into this building, the medical building, we put into Weimar to try to get it resurrected. Then, in 2011, Ted Wilson was to make his first visit here as General Conference President to kick off New Start Global. And something happened that day. I won't go into a big detail, but the Weimar board was completely dissolved that morning. Amazing Facts was totally backing away, and 3 years of tremendous sacrifice seemed to be all for naught. And Erica, after the meeting was over and I told her what happened, she cried like a baby. And she says, "It's over. It's over." Now, our staff was actually, they kind of knew what was happening, but they were still thinking, Nedley's here, we're going to go forward. So I had a private meeting with the General Conference president as he walked into campus, and I said, all of the people that have helped bring this place up are all leaving. There's no support. And they're wanting me to do this on my own. And I need help, and I'm not going to do this on my own. Oklahoma still wants us. We can still continue to do what we were doing there. There's no reason for us to stay. And Ted and Nancy Wilson begged for us to stay. I said, why doesn't the General Conference take it? They said, don't do that. He said, don't do that. Don't put it under the church. We're not going to know how to do it. And he says, trust God, and he'll come through. Well, my own father, who was always my source of wisdom, who was no longer there, was not there for me to talk to. I would have loved to have talked to him even before I made the decision to come out to Weimar. But this was about as close to God as I knew. The General Conference president, and after he told me that, I said, I'm not going to tell the staff that I was flinching at all. And we're going to go forward and see what happens. We did feel all alone, almost threw in the towel, particularly since so much more seemed to be beckoning us in Oklahoma. So Weimar was 33 at that point and near death again. Now we had to start a new board, had to find new supporters. And Weimar needs more workers. We need more students. The new board, fortunately, was highly supportive and very sacrificial themselves, and they began to support in new ways. The board chairman started a new policy governance model so that Weimar would never have the conflicts it once had. The conflicts were actually over management. Board members wanted to manage the institution and not just provide the policies of the institution, and so there was the management part of things. So we totally separated management from the board. Not totally, but almost. They have one primary aspect regards to management, and that is policies. But another primary aspect, and if they don't like the way the institution is being managed, they fire the president, and they get a new president in. So after age 33 to 40, Weimar has gradually returned to health. I often wondered how many wounds that can lead to death can you have and still experience healing? Because Weimar has had many. They have had many wounds that could lead to death. But Weimar is now healthy. Nobody is thinking it will close now. It's more secure in many ways than so many other colleges and universities. In many ways. I mean, take away government support from other colleges and universities, see what's going to happen. And, you know, people seem to forget that our government is trillions of dollars in debt. They're relying upon a very unstable institution. And Jerry Page is still on the board to this day. He's praising God, as all the people involved in Weimar's recovery are doing today. So Weimar today, the Academy, 76 students, 16 seniors will be graduating this year, we hope, 27 juniors. By the way, there'd be more juniors if we would have had room for them. There would have been probably at least another 5 or 10. 10 years ago, enrollment was low at the Academy. I'll just tell you, we were pressured as soon as we came here from the organization who asked us to close the Academy. And when I went over there and evaluated the academy, I thought they were probably right. It kind of morphed into a special ed school. The students that couldn't get in anywhere else or couldn't pass anywhere else were now coming to Weimar Academy. And I'm thinking, we're supposed to be forming leaders? I mean, you know, this is a good task to work with the special ed students, but I'm not sure this is why Weimar exists. The academics have improved significantly. Service learning has improved since those days, 10 or 8 years ago. Enrollment is steady and at historically high levels. And interestingly, the last 9 years, we've had more alumni from Weimar Academy than from Weimar College. Weimar College, 115 enrolled this year. No more dorm space for women. In fact, we had to turn some women students away this year. They would have been accepted. They had all the qualifications, but we didn't have the space. Only 1 to 2 beds left for men. And the HEAL, A Hurting World, has been an acronym. The H for health, the E for evangelism, the A for academic excellence, and the L for labor and service, which still goes back to Weimar's 40 years ago plan. The programs here, first time, of course, Weimar has actually had a bona fide pre-medical or natural science program where all the hard sciences are taught. Pre-dental students here as well, pre-physical therapy students. In fact, I don't think we've had a PT student that's applied that has not gotten into a PT school. By the way, PT schools are about as hard to get into as dental schools today. Pre-public or allied health students as well. High acceptance rate into U.S. medical schools, many students publishing abstracts in peer-reviewed publications. We wanted Weimar to have its foot in regards to research and publications. That was the goal 40 years ago. And it did kind of occur when Dr. Crane was here to some extent, but it went away after Dr. Crane, and for years nothing was published. Now Weimar is publishing studies far more than it ever has, probably about 20 per year. Clinical experience using lifestyle medicine principles and unprecedented, top in the nation. There is no pre-medical natural science program anywhere in the world that you can come to and get the clinical experience in lifestyle medicine that you do at Weimar Institute. And that's unarguable. Nobody's going to argue that fact because Weimar leads the way. Theology and religion, the only pastoral training program in North America that incorporates the healing ministry of Christ and the church as part of its core curriculum. The opportunity to rotate in depression and anxiety recovery and New Start. Now, I understand by talking to your religion department that that's mandatory, and I think maybe the religion part, but not the theology part, but I would highly recommend any student to take advantage of that because that's also how you're going to be able to learn how to take people in real practical ways from health to Him. And possible plan now as a result of what may happen in February with a master's type program, and that can open the way for a bivocational degree. In other words, you can get your bachelor's in nursing, spend an extra, and if you've done that at Weimar with all of the religion courses here, you can just do 1 more year and get your master's to actually have your training to be your master's in pastoral ministry. And so you can be a full-fledged pastor with that additional year of training, something that Don Mackintosh did himself, and why he's very passionate about bivocational training. Business program, it's our newest program, now in its 2nd year, although at least one student is in its junior year. Interfacing with far more business leaders whose intent is to share Christ in the marketplace than any other business program I know of. And healthcare administration is one of the keys. Why did we start the business program? Because we want leaders in healthcare. And that includes the administrative aspect of things. Dick Hart at Loma Linda University has told me it's harder to find it's harder to find someone to administer a hospital in the mission field than it is a doctor in the mission field. And it's hard to find doctors in the mission field, but it's even harder to find administrators. And these are individuals that can make a powerful difference in their communities. Education program has been growing, particularly this year. They're learning the principles of emotional intelligence, the importance of what we put into our bodies and what we do with our bodies and minds, because education has to be based on that. Our students are interfacing with the elementary school, soon to interface with the academy as well. Our nursing program. This is a happy group of students and nursing faculty. It's an intense program, and I don't know of any other associate's degree program in the nation, because associate's degree nursing programs are intense. Why are they intense? You have to pass national boards as like a 4-year nursing student, but you only have 2 intense years to train for the national boards. So with that intense training, we also add onto it lifestyle treatments of disease, biblical courses on how to be an evangelistic nurse, plus TCI, where they go out every week and serve their community. Yet, we've had 100% NCLEX passage rate on the first try. So something that no other college would have done has actually resulted in very high passage rates and also very high nursing rates, and being able to give the entire expanded message at the bedside, because their toolbox is greatly expanded as a result of being here at Weimar. They're also offered the highest incomes to relation to number of college credits completed of virtually any comparable program. So if you look at how many credits they're getting at their associate's degree, if you need bills to pay off, it's actually very easy after coming to the nursing program. Plan is to offer a bachelor's in nursing starting the fall of 2019. What about finances? You know, there was one other program I was going to mention here. Where did I put it? I think I flipped it around. Is Melissa here? Maybe she's listening, but the interdisciplinary degree with the large psychology emphasis and also the large music emphasis. Over 60% of young people today in the nation have a diagnosable mental disorder today, far higher than ever before. By the way, it's not that high at Weimar College. We actually screen them in a required freshman class, if you're going to get a bachelor's here, called Optimize Your Brain. So we identify those at an early stage and we get them involved in the right ways, but it's not even above 20%. So we have a healthy group of students that are here. But with the problems that are there on every other university, and by the way, these are major universities, still 60%. We need more licensed, solid counselors who obtain their wisdom from the wonderful counselor, the mighty God and the Prince of Peace. And that is our goal as well in the fall of this year, to start a master's degree that leads to counseling and psychology. Finances. Well, with that huge struggle and huge debt in 2011, we could tell you some stories, but God has come through just like Ted Wilson said that he would, if we were willing to stay and sacrifice. In 2009, the total assets were less than $2 million and our debts were far over that. Last year, our assets are $9.2 million with no debt, and this year, they're $10.7 million in assets. And our operations are running in the black with donations, an $8 million budget, higher than it's ever been at Weimar Institute. We also have the health and MAP programs I should mention. Anyone can come to health. By the way, if any of you have already graduated degrees and advanced degrees, you will find yourself exponentially more successful if you take one semester here at the Health Evangelism and Leadership Training course. It's a certificate course. We've had physicians, attorneys, dentists, all sorts of health professionals, nurses go through this. And when I go around the country and speak, one of my primary comments at the end of telling about Weimar is, I wish I were 18 again so I could take my college there. Well, if you're one of those that wish that you could come to Weimar College, you actually still can. It's called the health program, and even those with terminal degrees come there. The MAP program is the medical assistant program that we're running this winter, and of course we have a full family practice clinic on campus that has over 20,000 visits a year, also very different from when it was started out 40 years ago. So why are we going after the most respected type of accreditation? And this is really to answer the number one stated reason for opposition to Weimar Institute. This is the number one stated reason. When we get this, there'll be another number one stated reason. I don't know what it's going to be yet. But at this point, we want to answer the number one stated reason. And to get the signed papers from the king to actually rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. We can't start graduate degree programs without it, and Weimar is actually set up in major ways to be much more of a graduate school sometimes than an undergraduate school with the research and other things that is going on here. And so that means we need Nehemiahs and team members to form with Nehemiah to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem when this happens. Other needs that we have here, development director. This is really being done with only a development director that's been in place for 1 year ago. And so we've done it all without a development director essentially, but we do need, he left and took a presidential position, a CEO position of major healthcare organization, so we couldn't blame him for leaving. But we do need a development director. We also need a PhD psychologist, licensed for all forms of counseling and instructing that meets the Weimar principles, as well as a few others that you could see on our website. Physical needs, we need a new start in Depression Recovery Lodge. Why do we need that? The primary reason is it opens up housing for students wanting to be enrolled at Weimar. Some people are saying, hey, you're getting accredited and you're already run out of room. That doesn't sound wise. Well, it is wise if we can house the students, and we'll be able to house another 100 students or so if that happens. And so that is our next new project. It will actually be overlooking the farm on the upper side, overlooking the Sierras that actually are there around Lake Tahoe. We also need a new church conference and music center. Dawn mentioned that. It's going to seat 600 in that place. And that will be where the old chapel is. It's going to be now sideways. It'll be landscaped the other way. And we'll hold that. We need an expanded cafeteria. We'll also need probably expanded cafeteria hours as well to be able to cycle through the increased students. But that is also part of our need. The Weimar board, this would not have happened without the new Weimar board. It's skilled and it's mission-minded, and Weimar, despite their other jobs, is their top priority. All 13 members were here at the last board meeting. We also, in looking to the future, need to address more fully the leading causes of death and disability. The leading causes today are just like they were 40 years ago in this area: heart disease and atherosclerosis. Weimar New Start has the answer to that. But there wasn't any depression or anxiety recovery program back 40 years ago. But deaths of despair are rapidly rising. It's why the average age is going down in America, is due to deaths of despair, which occurs in all age groups and all socioeconomic status. And so we need to expand that we'll talk about. Of course, obesity, hypertension, high cholesterol, those are all leading causes. Diabetes, we could have listed there as well. Addictions are at an all-time high. They're leading causes as well. But I also wanted to mention this one that we haven't so comprehensively addressed, and that is cancer. Weimar, on its long-term plan, has a full-service cancer center as part of the plan, and we actually have a Mayo Clinic-trained oncologist who's willing to come in a year and a half if we continue to go through with this project. So, what's going to happen in the future? Well, some of this is going to start in January. We're starting a postgraduate program, a fellowship training program in lifestyle medicine. John Kelly is coming here, and this is one that you have to pay to go through this fellowship, but it's coming in January. Also, once the Lifestyle Center is built, we will have a 1-year paid fellowship training. That means doctors out of their specialty training can come here for 1 year and get paid to be fellowship trained in depression and anxiety recovery. And the goal is to double the program. Right now we have a capacity of 20. We could easily do 40 every month with the demands for this program. And with a couple of fellows here, this is something that we're going to be able to actually do and train them actually to start new Weimar Institutes as well when they finish their fellowship training. So Weimar Institute doesn't just need to be at Weimar. And then our full-service cancer center that we spoke of. And then, of course, as part of that future, if we go through all of this, will be further advanced postgraduate degrees. And we have a strategic planning session with our key faculty and leaders this Tuesday night to discuss that this coming Tuesday night to discuss that very aspect of things. So I'd like to thank each of you here tonight for studying and serving at Weimar Institute. Weimar would not have been able to accomplish this with Neil Nedley or a few board members alone. It takes all of you to accomplish this as well. And so thanks for coming to this alumni meeting and contributing. We appreciate your support in so many ways. And I'd like to request all of you to pray for Weimar. After Nehemiah got permission to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, it wasn't a piece of cake after that. Opposition came internal and external in many forms, but he stayed focused and the team rebuilt the walls. And that is our goal at Weimar. And that's why I believe Weimar's most exciting days are not what has happened in the last 40 years, but what is yet to come. May God continue to bless each of you abundantly beyond your expectations. Do we have a closing prayer? Yes. Okay. Lance, I'll turn it over to you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
One of our natural science graduates from last May.
Good evening. Powerful to see how God has led, amen? Amen. I was reading yesterday in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. We turn there. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 10. It says, "But by the grace of God, I am what I am." I believe it's by the grace of God that Weimar Institute is what it is. Amen? It's not by man's effort. It's not by man's cunning. It's by God, by the grace of God. It says, "But by the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace which was bestowed upon me was not in vain. But I labored more abundantly than they all, yet not I, but the grace of God which was with me." We need more of that grace. You heard about some of the plans that Dr. Nedley and the board have for Weimar, and so what we're going to do now is we're going to enter a time of prayer. We're actually going to go to 7 different locations on campus and pray for God's grace to continually be bestowed upon us, and we're going to sing some songs. Kiona, would you tell us about that?
Sure. As we go around to these 7 stations, we will be walking to these 7 stations, and as we're walking, we're going to be singing some songs. We have some people who have graciously lended to the Lord their talent of playing the guitar, and we will be going to those 7 stations singing songs that many of us know. For example, a song like Amazing Grace, we have a prayer, and that will happen as the closing song, I guess you could say.
Yes. So we'll start outside. Please join us, and you will be richly blessed.
And as you're going outside, right outside, there is a table full of lit candles. So as you head out the door, pick up a candle, and we'll meet you right outside of Haskell.
Happy Sabbath.